Shall we get started? I hear there are Republican debates tonight or something. We're not too sorry about missing that, right? Anybody care? Oh, do we need updates? No. No live tweets? No. We'll skip that. We have way more important things to do here today. It's so great to be here in New York. Parsons, Bill, and all of your team, thank you so much for hosting us. We've really had a great day. I got here yesterday and I got off the subway and I was right at the intersection of 13th and 7th. And I'm sort of looking around. I love New York. I lived here for 6 years. It's like my brother's here. He lives around the corner from that neighborhood. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what's different on this corner? You know, I know there's a lot of development, but I realize that what's different is that this little triangle intersection is a new park. And I just have to say, like, it's just fascinating to me. I'm thinking to myself, you know, New York is doing all these kind of little infill park projects. They're using their infrastructure so well. And I'm looking around and there are benches and there's a water fountain and kids are playing. It was really hot yesterday. So there are families, there are people, they're eating, you know, all kinds of people there. I'm looking around this neighborhood and of course there's this housing going up across the street. And we know housing prices in that neighborhood, right? So I'm sort of going through my mind. I'm like, is this like the best time for design? You know, where design is infiltrating into our consciousness as a way to, you know, improve public infrastructure, to make cities more livable. Is this a good time for housing? I mean, you're reading things in the paper about the housing boom, and God knows in this city, you know, the price of housing. But like, I'm also feeling this sort of profound disconnect around these issues because I do think it's a really good time for design. And I also know that it's an extremely challenging time for housing, right? We at Enterprise, we've been running the numbers. We're watching these things very closely, obviously. 19 million Americans are housing insecure, we call it. So either homeless, a paycheck away from getting evicted, or you know, they're paying more than 50% of their income on rent. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means they're not paying for other things, right? You're not paying for healthcare, you're not paying for groceries, you're not paying for, you know, you're making these terrible choices all the time. So I'm having this kind of swirl around in my brain, like being excited about the potential for design to become more a part of our sort of public vocabulary as a solution, right? But also more aware that at the same time as we're really getting smarter about so many things in design, we know that if we design high quality, you know, transit accessible, healthy materials, connected, affordable, beautiful housing, we will have tangible impacts on people's lives. It's not rocket science. It turns out that you can change a person's life through the provision of high quality, affordable housing. But 19 million, it's like, I don't know. So why aren't we doing that? How are we letting this kind of growing economic divide continue to really hobble not only our low-income residents who, of course, are suffering from these effects the worst, but sort of our country as a whole? So I want to keep an edge on the night tonight because I think we have serious challenges ahead of us. And I feel this kind of combination of this profound sort of sense of optimism. I mean, we had a great day today. I'll tell you about our day. All right. Today was like my fantasy day, right? Okay, many of you know, like, we love our fellows, right? We love them. We love our hosts. But today we kind of turned a little bit of a corner. It just felt really good. Instead of doing our normal selection process, where we have I thought we always had a good selection process, but we shook it up this year. And we invited 25 finalists to come today, and almost all of you are here with us. And we invited our hosts to come and really get to know each other and sort of express really what motivates people, where they come from. And I mean, how could you not feel outrageously optimistic today? You know, optimistic about design, optimistic about the idea that we can actually bring a social justice mission with the highest caliber thinking and the most powerful creativity and ideas. But I also am just here to say that amongst all that optimism, like, you want this fellowship? Like, good luck to you, because it's hard. Okay? Like, this is not a prize. You know? This is not a prize. Right? Like, it might be a platform, but, like, you know, do with it what you will, right? It's tough stuff going on right now in America and in America's neighborhoods. It's really tough stuff, and it takes a certain, you know, it takes a certain grit, really. But today we were hearing finalists talk about identity and authenticity. We were hearing people talking about compassion. We were hearing a lot of listening. We were hearing this really magical combination of sort of a vision and an ambition with kind of a deep humility. And so, I mean, in some ways, what I would say to everyone who is here today, like, you are Rose Fellows. Like, you are the definition of what we call a Rose Fellow. And however your paths unfold, the other thing I would say is when I see you guys out there at tables, like drinking wine together and chatting, is that you need each other, right? 19 million people. Like, we're not getting this job done the way we're doing it now, right? So, like, this whole next-gen leadership, like, duh, it's not me, right? And you're going to need each other in that mission. So Maya made you those beautiful business cards. You know, use them. Use them. Don't leave here today and go home and kind of, you know, none of that, right? This is a time for sort of a new approach. And so I'm thrilled. I love being in a city like New York, which represents the best of creativity, the best of culture, the best of diversity, the best of street life. And then I'm also terrified by the other things that New York is coming to represent lately. And some of the things that don't make it the best, or at least not the best for everybody. So anyway, that was my day. How was your day? All right. So, Alan, you're not done. Alan's like, I'm exhausted. Yeah. Exhausted. Okay, so yet we have really the most beautiful program tonight. Every year in the fall, we come together and celebrate our outgoing class of fellows. And we really like to do that with the incoming class of hosts, and this year the incoming class of fellows, because it's a chance for you to kind of like project 3 years into the future. So we couldn't be more pleased than to have our fellows and their partners here with us tonight. Emily, Geoffrey, and Joseph are all going to speak. You know, each class has its own sort of style and resonance. Some of the finalists today were asking me, like, well, you have 3 years. How does this all work? And in fact, the fellows identify as a class, but then they also get to sort of mentor each other along the path, and it's one of the really beautiful parts of the fellowship. So Emily and Geoffrey and Joseph, well, of course, it feels like yesterday that you started. Like, let's face it. But as is what happens in these things, it's been incredibly beautiful to watch you mature and watch you really contribute to your communities in such incredibly powerful ways. They also have each really contributed, you know, I would say nationally, to these much larger conversations that position sort of a new, what I would say, very optimistic view of design and view of housing. Each of them are working on serious projects. You'll hear about, you know, the development of many units of affordable housing, of master plans, of neighborhood investments, of community centers, of all these kind of pieces of exploration into different forms of building rural housing, all kind of different pieces. But they've also sort of done it with this kind of deep sort of compassion and love, which I would say is ultimately kind of one of these things that is maybe one of the most powerful lessons from today, was hearing the sort of passion in people's heart and saying, how do we get that? You know, that's what we want, right? That's the part of you we want, the part that kind of chokes up a little bit and can't but do otherwise. So their work and work of many of our other fellows in the program has really inspired us along this path of this recent sort of work we've done and this beautiful, beautiful book that Maya Sharfi, who helped us coordinate today, helped put together for us. It's called Made with Love, Collaborative Actions, Recipes for Community Change. And I think they'll speak a little bit about some of their work. I'd encourage you to take a copy of this home with you. We've left them. They've cost, you know, we had to produce these. They're beautiful. Savor them. Share them. They're valuable. They were made with love. But essentially, I think that much of these three incredible individuals and their beautiful host partners, for us, really represent some of the best of what we see. This combination to a pretty clear-eyed view of reality, you know, and an understanding of not just the theoretical needs of a community, but the actual, you know, dreads of a community, right? Like the things that really keep people up at night in their communities, they're getting to know and face. And so they're taking on, you know, both the sort of infrastructural big ideas along and doing it with this kind of really deep humility. So I'm thrilled to invite them to the stage, and I want to thank Parsons. I want to thank our fabulous New York Enterprise team. We're so glad that you've had us here today. I want to thank my team. I want to thank Autodesk has been one of our wonderful new funders this year. And we have a number of funders who have contributed deeply to our program to allow us to do this work. And we're really grateful for all of your support. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Katie. And thank you all for being here tonight to share in our conversation. We feel so privileged to be here with you, and we're humbled to be among such esteemed colleagues and guests. And we're thankful for the last 3 years of exhilarating and challenging work that the Rose Fellowship has provided for us. My name's Geoffrey Barton, and I am a Rose Fellow in Asheville, North Carolina, with Mountain Housing Opportunities and the Asheville Design Center. And along with me are Emily Roush Elliott in Greenwood, Mississippi, with the Greenwood-Leflore-Carroll Economic Development Foundation and the Carl Small Town Center, and Joseph Kunkel in Santo Domingo, New Mexico, at the Santo Domingo Tribal Housing Authority and the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative. We'll be sharing examples of what's going on in our host communities. And we have the goal of fostering a larger conversation afterwards through a panel discussion on issues that are facing the future of our work. So Katie's introduction was very salient to, I think, the conversation we want to have today. And all of us in the room here are coming with distinctive skill sets and backgrounds, and all of us are going to be necessary to create projects with lasting impact. Whether you're a designer, a developer, a strategist, or a funder, we're all here because we're believers. We believe in the transformative power of a safe, attractive, affordable home, not just for the family that lives there, but for the broader community as well. We believe that communities prosper when all of its members have opportunities for success. And we believe that housing plays a really important role in community health. So today our focus is not to send these messages out into the echo chamber, but to focus instead on the how. How do we implement these beliefs? And how do we make them into projects that go towards Enterprise's goal of ending housing insecurity in this country. We can't do it alone, and we can't do it without significant resources. But what we can do today is start the dialogue on how we can do more and how we can do better. So as you'll see in our examples, we're not just in the business of creating units of housing. We're working in and with communities that are in need of repair and rebirth. So we're using affordable housing to serve a vast and unfortunately a growing need, but also as a vehicle towards broader community development. We'll look at examples from Greenwood, Santo Domingo, and Asheville through 3 thematic lenses. First, what does success look like in place-based community development? Second, how do we match values with value to attract and retain investment in under-resourced communities? And third, what is the role that design plays in all of this? These are big questions that can't be answered by young architects in just 3 years on a fellowship. So after the presentation, we'll be joined by Jason Schupak from the National Endowment for the Arts to facilitate a conversation. And we invite you all to sort of participate in that, to sort of create a discussion around these issues. So without further ado, Emily will introduce our first theme.
As diverse as the different Rose Fellowship experiences are, one of the shared values is in the importance of community engagement. We all have a lot of experience listening for the needs and the aspirations of typically marginalized communities. But even with that experience, you still have to remind yourself not to overlay your own definitions of success. And so what we're going to talk about in 3 quick examples are how we have tried not to overlay our own definitions of success. This is Dorothy. Dorothy is one of my favorite people. Here she is in her new home. She bought a cottage through the Baptist Town Cottage Project earlier this year. Previously to buying this home, Dorothy was a renter for almost 30 years, all in the same house. She was a model tenant. She took good care of her home and she paid on time, but her landlord still wouldn't upkeep, even the most basic of maintenance. She had a hole in her bathroom floor that you could see straight through to the ground. Ever since she bought this home, we've seen this landlord a few times knocking on the door. He's asking her what he could do to get her to come back and be his tenant again. And I have seen Dorothy saying some things that I won't say tonight on the microphone to this man, kicking him off the property. And that wasn't our goal. We had originally hoped to increase the units of home ownership in Baptist Town. We had hoped to increase the quality of housing, the safety and the healthiness of those homes, but we never could have foreseen this particular metric of success without knowing Dorothy on a really personal level. So this is a very localized definition of success for me, is Dorothy. And so now Joseph and Geoffrey are going to talk a little more in depth about their definitions of success that they found and did not bring.
So, place-based community design, what does that mean for Santo Domingo? What does it mean for when we're working with the community, and what has it led to at Santo Domingo? I think, so I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about how and where we've gone the past kind of 3 years briefly, and kind of talk about how we've worked with people and really tried to start to identify with the community this idea of community-based design. Working with the community, we identified 2 new affordable housing sites. One that has led to the development of a $9 million affordable housing project consisting of 41 units of housing, a 3,000 square foot community center, and so on. But I want to kind of back up a little bit and talk a little bit, how did we get there? It started with a National Endowments for the Arts grant, an Our Town grant, that helped us to really understand this place, the site, the community, through this asset mapping project, right? And so we used this information to really try and identify how and where we would develop and how we would develop, understanding the historic village, understanding Domingo, understanding the connection between the two. And so we engaged people, we engaged community, we engaged tribal leadership, and tried to understand the community from afar. We looked at tradition. We really kind of stepped back and tried to understand what was this place made up of. And then we kind of moved towards this idea of a housing design workshop with funding through a small capacity grant from Enterprise, trying to understand, well, let's bring 3 design teams into the community and look at what are the potentials instead of just hiring one architect. Let's kind of work with multiple. And this idea of tradition, a development close to the village and a development kind of 2.5 miles away in Domingo. And we came up with options for both the developments. One, kind of an affordable home ownership site of 60 units that's close to tribal resources, community health center, elder center, a gym, and so on. And then the low-income housing tax credit project that we were awarded a tax credit allocation for 41-unit housing development, which at the time during this housing design workshop, this is what was proposed, and understanding kind of those kind of historic traditional housing patterns, which then has led to kind of where we are today with this 41-unit housing development that's not very different from what we came up with originally, and allowed for that to kind of prosper and develop into a project where we're going out to construction and bidding in 10 days. So.
So moving to Asheville, the corner of Eagle and Market Streets is also known as the Block in Asheville. It was once the heart of Asheville's African-American business district. It was home to over 50 African-American businesses, from dentists and doctors to blues clubs and barbershops. After integration and with the extension of a thoroughfare through the community that not so accidentally cut off the commercial area from the residential area, the businesses really suffered. And then urban renewal programs were further used to demolish historic buildings and replace them with a parking deck that served downtown. So the block fell into decades of decline. Redevelopment and the renaissance of downtown Asheville that hit most places in the 1990s touched every other part except for the block. So when Mountain Housing Opportunities was asked to partner with another local CDC to find a successful vision for the site, MHO looked at a key element that hadn't been looked at before, and it's really been lost over the years, a residential population, to make that commercial enterprise viable in the existing businesses, but also to pave way for commercial enterprises in the future. So after 20 years of false starts from previous development schemes with other developers, this vision honed by MHO and the Eagle Market Streets Development Corporation really took hold. It was crafted through extensive planning studies and through extensive conversations with the community, and led to funding for a mixed-use Eagle Marketplace. So Eagle Marketplace is 62 apartments over 7,000 square feet of commercial space. It retains the historic character of the block by reusing pieces of 2 historic buildings and preserving this third building, the Del Cardo, in its entirety on the corner. So all of our financial and community partners felt that this really ambitious vision would mean sure success for the block. And achieving this strong shared vision was indeed a major accomplishment, but you can't end there. You have to actually build the building. And that's where things have proven to be really difficult. So the people laughing know what the end of this story. So this visionary project started construction in 2014. And it was designed to have a podium concrete slab with 5 stories of residential above it. The slab has been described as the most complicated post-tension slab in the Southeast, and therein lied the problem. There were some flaws in design and construction, and our slab broke in the middle of construction. Last October, actually. So for about the past year, we've been in the business of redefining what does success look like for this project. It looks like endless meetings with lawyers, finding a new structural engineer, and maintaining that vision for the community that was crafted so carefully and with such sensitivity to what had been lost over the years. So the delays tested the patience of our financial partners and the community, but has it really shaken the vision for the project? Over the past year, I think Cindy and I might have said maybe, but I'm happy to say today that as of last week, we're moving forward once again, and we're going to be remobilizing to demolish the flawed slab and rebuilding, albeit with a new structural engineer. So, thanks. I've learned tremendous lessons through this project. Everyone wants to share in success. No one wants to share in failure. So by creating strong buy-in for a vision from the beginning, not just a number of units or not just an amount of commercial square footage, but a vision, a comprehensive vision for community development, and staying focused in the face of major obstacles like cracked post-tension slabs, success will prevail. I've also learned that if success comes easily to you in a project, then you're obviously not trying hard enough. So moving on to our second theme, as Rose Fellows, we're often challenged by Katie to be creative disruptors within our host communities. This can mean taking longer to incubate a project so that a community can participate in shaping the vision for it. It can also mean bringing in non-traditional partners like artists or school groups. So as you can imagine, stepping into a nonprofit community development organization that's always stretched thin on resources and saying, let's slow down and see what the artists think. It's not always met with the greatest optimism. But looking within a community for overlooked assets can create tremendous momentum for a project. So the question is, how do we match values with value to attract and retain investment in under-resourced communities? Joseph and Emily both saw real resources within their host communities, and they looked within the community members' aspirations and also within cultural heritage. Neither of these resources will help boost a pro forma or can be quantified on a real estate appraisal. But as Emily and Joseph will show, they can be catalysts for attracting significant funding.
So I'm going to share another kind of story about a little bit about that housing development project that I talked a little bit about, that 41 unit development. But how did we get to there, and where did we start? And I kind of like to talk about a little bit of what Katie talked about, the kind of boots on the ground scale, the work on Santo Domingo, but also this idea of the national dialogue and the research and trying to understand what's going on in and around the country. And so with the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative, being able to understand that relationship to the national scale and seeing what's going on in the country, but then referring and understanding how that work relates back to Santo Domingo and vice versa. How can the work at Santo Domingo help to inform other work going on in and around the country? And so that kind of national scale, I kind of always kind of try and step back and understand this idea. Last time I showed this slide, it was 566 federally recognized tribes, and that was maybe 4 months ago. Now we have 567, 5.2 million tribal populations. And so they're federally recognized tribes. And so that number is, how do we impact that number, but also kind of understand the scale of the community, right? This idea of 450, 500 units of housing. And so kind of this matching of values with value. What does that mean for Santo Domingo? Again, I kind of go back to this idea of people. It's about kind of engaging the population, understanding the community, taking their voices and trying to understand how their voices can be kind of influence the design work that's going on the ground at Santo Domingo. It's also kind of understanding the environment and trying to understand how and the work kind of can impact the environment and in a positive way. I think it's also about understanding the place and the culture. This is the Santo Domingo Trading Post, a 100-plus-year-old building that is going to be another kind of economic hub or an arts incubator for the community, kind of taking that traditional culture of pottery and art making and really kind of incubating the art as an economic generator. And so what did we do to kind of get to that point? I kind of like to talk about this idea of community engagement. We really kind of worked with the people to kind of understand the community and this idea of creative placemaking and designing specifically for Santo Domingo, understanding that they're very kind of a unique community, as with all the tribal communities that are around the country. And this idea of a collaborative action we talked about, made with love, the kind of collaborative actions that we were talking about. This basically started with a small $5,000 grant that we walked from one housing development to another housing development to try and understand what that connection between these two housing developments meant, right? And so basically walking from the village, which you see on the left, all the way to Domingo, where the trading post is located. But also located there is a heavy commuter rail, which gives community members access to both Santa Fe and Albuquerque. At that stop, we're developing that 41-unit housing development. I like to kind of refer to it as a rural transit-oriented development, which is pretty awesome in this community to have this place that people can hop on a commuter rail and get to these places of education, jobs, food, healthy food, etc., and so on. So we basically walked the trail, and during that we came up with a schematic design. Oh, let's design this piece of infrastructure that a lot of rural communities don't have access to, right? So, and a lot of cities have that kind of inherent infrastructure that's here. And so how do we design that in rural communities? And so basically we put pen to paper and started sketching out a trail. And that kind of ballooned into taking the work that we did with our town grant and kind of applied for an Art Place America grant. And we were lucky to receive funding through Art Place America and tried to kind of influence and kind of bring to bear the kind of art in the community, and how can we hire local artists to design these nodes? Why is the art and the culture so important to the community, and how can we showcase that? How can we leverage that within the community? And we're at that point where we've hired 6 local artists, and we have a national design team too that are trying to kind of understand what is that scale of the pot and how does that balloon up. And these are kind of some examples of what the local artists are coming up with, this idea of a kind of a large Santo Domingo pot and the idea of the traditional shell, and what does that mean at that kind of large kind of landscape scale. Also, this idea of what do these infographics look like, the Santo Domingo Heritage Arch Trail or the KEWA Heritage Arch Trail, and the idea of kind of implanting it on the landscape. And so in the next kind of year or so, in spring, we'll start to kind of place that art on the landscape and really kind of make this place of Santo Domingo, which kind of goes back to this idea of what is the community's future values? What do they see in developing and making in their own community? And that's kind of hopefully where we get to and understand how that comes to be.
This is Baptist Town. It's shown here. It's a small neighborhood with a lot of history. It's over 135 years old, and it is and always has been 100% African American. It's one of the first places that historians think that freed slaves were able to own property in Mississippi after the Civil War. And since that time, it has never been a place that represents economic wealth. It still isn't to this day. But as the Carl Small Town Center went in and began engaging with the community to develop this master plan many years ago, what they found was the other kind of wealth, right? The real kind. The kind where community members work together, where it's rich in culture and neighbors know that they can rely on each other. Though vacant, muddy lots don't command high or sometimes even any property value, this lot actually had a negative property value. We're looking for opportunities where we can find something that was typically undervalued or even seen as waste, and how can we use that and turn it from a muddy lot into a new gathering place? Because in this setting where cultural values, where depending on your neighbor has become the currency that really takes precedent because it is the currency that exists, that's so much more important, is a place to gather, than if we could have made a few or $10 available to each person. Another way that we tried to uncover value was by paying attention to some kids. Kids were telling us they needed a new playground, so we said, come together and design it with us. So they did, and we documented it, and we presented that to some funders, and we have a wonderful corporate local presence from GE, from General Electric, and they funded this playground. Not only did the kids design it, but they also played a huge part in building it. Before you see any more wonderful pictures, I have to thank my husband, Richard Elliott, who's in the audience, for taking every one of the pictures that you'll see. Otherwise, it'd be 3 years later, and there would be no photos at all. Within the rural context that all three of us talk about, resources are so slim. I know we all struggle for these things, but we certainly are looking for capacity and resources anywhere we can find it. The Baptist Town Cottage Project really relied on 26 Katrina cottages. These are not FEMA trailers. These are the healthier, modular successors to the FEMA trailer. We utilized these as our material resource, and then we paired it with the human resource because that's the thing that we see being least leveraged, least appreciated. These unemployed women came together. They had 3 days of landscape installation training, and they installed a stormwater garden on the site of the Baptist Town cottages, and they got paid $10 an hour for their time. But this is one of my favorite pictures because this is our construction team. With the exception of my husband and I, everyone in this picture has a pretty significant criminal background. You can see the man on the right is actually currently in prison, but these have become some of our best friends, actually. These are people that could not find a job, and we were able to offer a job, but through that job, complete the Baptist Town Cottage project. We've since sold 11 homes to low and extremely low-income families like Brenda here, all first-time home buyers. Brenda was actually displaced by Hurricane Katrina years and years ago, and now has finally found a really safe place to land here at the Cottage project. So, as we're talking about uncovering values, we ask ourselves, how do we uncover and leverage value that has traditionally been overlooked? And that started as a simple question, but now I think really is a defining aspect of our work completely. And so it might take the form of something that's a salvaged material. It might take the form of utilizing space in a more creative way, sharing some space. It might take the form of leveraging some capital that someone has put up for a different project, and then we say, can we borrow it while you're not using it, just for a little while? But continually we find ourselves coming back to the asset that is the people, and these people in this neighborhood that are particularly underestimated. This last image is of what we called Good At Day. It's the same $5,000 grant that we're all referencing. It was the Made with Love grant that Katie referenced. We put it together and we asked the neighborhood what was most important and what was most lacking, and people said, we just need to appreciate what we're all good at. So it became Good At Day, and we had a day where we all came together and celebrated our own skills and our own talents, and you can see kids here filling in the blanks. And as we look at tackling these really difficult challenges, instead of looking at these kids filling in the blanks and saying, how do we tackle the challenge of housing them in the future, how do we bring them in and help them be part of our resources as we tackle that challenge?
For our kind of last theme, this is a big one. Why does design matter? So I think the core of what we as fellows are doing is promoting and using design in our architectural thinking to impact the most marginalized populations here in the United States. Emily and Geoffrey will in these next couple slides or projects demonstrate how good design can do 4 things: inspire old and new generations, right? How design can reinforce and create a sense of identity, how design can create a sense of place and a place of meaning. And lastly, I think giving opportunity for new economies and showcasing culture and art and allowing for these marginalized populations to really thrive in their own kind of place and sense of being and so on. So that's what we want to try and explain through this idea of why does design matter.
So that's a really tall order for design. Design can accomplish all those things, and we truly believe that. Or it can be a part of what accomplishes all those things. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about Lee Walker Heights in Asheville. Built in 1950, Lee Walker Heights is Asheville's oldest public housing community. It was originally conceived as veterans housing for African Americans returning from World War II. It contains 97 townhomes, and they're in 17 separate buildings on about 11.5 acres. It's really isolated from the rest of downtown Asheville, and as Asheville's growth has sort of migrated south, it continues to be a sort of isolated pocket of poverty. And so while it's had its fair share of maintenance issues, its crimes against urban design and accessibility are far worse. And so in our project, working with the Housing Authority to conceive of a redevelopment strategy, we're working on how design can be transformative for this community. With the goal of redeveloping the property by replacing all of the existing units, inviting all existing residents back in, and then adding 200 additional apartments design certainly matters, both in the process of how the planning comes together, as well as the physical form that is going to be the result of a community design process. The possibility of adding an adjacent 5.5 acre parcel to the project for a full 17 acres means that this could be a really large development that catalyzes an area surrounding the hospital and the south area of downtown. So in short, we need to be thinking big and we need to be thinking visionary on this. So in terms of process, designing the right process was our first task. In the past, design decisions at the Housing Authority and in the Asheville community at large had not been necessarily inclusive or informed by the community. So redevelopment presents an opportunity to not only fix the physical design, but also design better processes for the Housing Authority to solicit input from residents and have more of a dialogue. So we started by listening and asking really simple questions. What do you like about your community? What do you dislike? What will you be most proud of 5 years from now when this redevelopment is complete? And for those unable or disinterested in attending community meetings, we circulated surveys. We had modeling exercises, as you saw in the previous slide, to solicit input. We brought a core resident team on a tour of recently completed projects by Mountain Housing Opportunities to kind of inspire ideas beyond their immediate environment. And we were really surprised that the residents that we thought would be really partial to their door to the outside loved corridor buildings around a courtyard. So they weren't opposed to denser development, which we were kind of afraid of from the outset. We also conducted design sessions with kids, like you see here in the community. There are 96 kids that live in Lee Walker Heights of the 197 residents. So they're a really important constituent, and their input is really significant. So we're working with my co-host, the Asheville Design Center, on play spaces and recreation spaces for the kids. A lot of what came out of working with the kids has featured into the strategies for the larger development as well. They currently bike in the street because they don't have dedicated bike paths. They walk in the street because there are no sidewalks. So these are design elements that we're going to be bringing to the project to improve the spaces for the kids that we probably would have done, but now we have a real drive and focus to do it because the kids sort of showed us how they use their current space. One kid even participated by challenging our landscape architect on his parking ratios. All right? This is like a 10-year-old kid who's going toe-to-toe with our landscape architect. Well, you sure you have enough parking here? And could you preference the pedestrians in this area? Because I want to make sure I can cross the street to see my friend and not get hit by a car, right? These are important design considerations that came out of our collaborative process. So who knew that collaborative community planning and design is not just about the physical planning, but about education for the kids and for the design professionals who just kind of do their projects by rote. Speaking of design professionals, we were able to recruit David Baker architects out of San Francisco for this project, which is kind of an astounding win for us to bring them to Asheville and bring the great resources of a top-notch affordable housing design firm to our community. So having designed those processes that have been pretty effective at soliciting input, we really have started turning our attention to creating a beautiful physical environment. We are looking towards creating like an active design community with focus on recreation, passive recreation, and spaces for people of all levels to have programmed outdoor space rather than the past strategy, which has been sort of unprogrammed outdoor space that's left over and unable to be used because it's often dangerous. So this community, which has been hidden and isolated, is kind of stepping out of the shadows. And we really needed to focus on design as a way for them to come into the Asheville community with the best face forward. This is not going to look like public housing when we're done. This is going to look like a beautiful new development, a new neighborhood with some deep roots in a population that has been there for a long time without anybody knowing. So we're really excited about the challenge, and hopefully we can solve it without complex post-tension slabs.
Often when I speak about my work, I ask the audience how many people have ever worked with an architect because of how few people typically do. I'm not going to ask you all that because I think most of you are architects or work directly with them. But especially in the context of people who aren't very familiar with architects, especially social impact architects, we aren't connected to the idea of design being more than an added cost. And of course it is. Even the most aesthetic decision has significant inputs and ramifications that are difficult to see. We purchased a dilapidated building to be the Baptist Town Community Center about almost a year and a half ago now. And we had some big design challenges ahead of us. This is not a beautiful building. But we started off with the color because it was a terrible peeling paint job, and we had the neighborhood residents pull together a community vote. So residents voted for this red, red, red. So when you see it, though, it's not just red, right? It's about saying, I voted for that color. This is not just a design decision. This is about how someone feels. So then I'm going to dig into some real specifics about this hand railing entry sequence that we created. So I'm going to go back really quickly. Remember this entryway, right? It's all kinds of wrong. So first, we had to look at the code. It has to be accessible. People have to park here and be able to walk in. So we designed a new ramp, a new staircase, new entry sequence. Then working with Mississippi State University and the Carl Small Town Center, we had a group of 4 students who enrolled in a design build. They trusted me, and we just made up what we were doing. But we said we have to have a railing. It has to work, but also we want to balance this with the needs and the desires of students getting an architectural education. So they created this design where they got to prioritize some of their own goals. So welding was one, for example. So these girls welded these posts to these plates. Second, the guys that you saw in the previous picture, our construction crew who had worked with us on the cottages, hadn't gotten that much carpentry experience since these were modular houses. And in order to move to some next jobs, and we still have, and we employ them on a carpentry project they were probably working on today, we wanted some carpentry experience. So we developed that into the same design. So not only welding, but some specifics of carpentry. There's this fin design that the students put in here so that there's this real thought. You can see it. This isn't actually my favorite picture of it, but if you look closely, you can see there's a wave in those fins. It's very careful. It shows real attention to detail. And after zooming in so tightly to look at the code, to look at accessibility allows us to apply for grants for things to be hosted in this building. We needed to be wheelchair accessible. After that, we get to zoom all the way back out, and the idea is that not only does design mean more than the aesthetic decisions mean more than all these details. By designing a space that is cared for, the people who use that space also feel cared for. This happened about a week ago, and I was really lucky to grab this shot before I came. Before we move into the panel discussion, I think Joseph and Geoffrey and I have all committed to staying in the locations where we're working on our fellowships. People ask you. Thank you. People ask you from day one if you're going to stay. And Geoffrey said he decided before he actually was selected. But I think the reason we're all staying is because of this amazing environment that our hosts created for us. It was all of us are co-hosted. So we have this wonderful pairing of a design-focused team and a more development-focused team. We put that together and we got incredible support. So as we all come together to discuss these 3 questions, we want to hear, and we are used to hearing from our wonderful support teams, your opinions as well on these big questions. What does success look like? How do we pair value with values? Because these are some specific examples, but we don't claim we know the answers. These were questions for examples' sake. And then finally, why does design matter? So we want to know what you think. So Katie, introduce our panel, please.
Okay, so That was wonderful. Thank you. So when we were trying to tie this whole day together, we really had kind of two big goals, I guess. One was to make sure that we were really focusing on this question about developing leadership in the field, right? I already described how we got to spend the whole day with an amazing group of emerging leaders in the field, not one of whom we want to lose out of our network. And then we also wanted to really understand what is this work on the ground and how do we understand some of these issues that these three are posing for us and others. So combining these two things, I could really think of no one else besides a few others in this room maybe, than Jason Schupbach, who really has represented really the leading edge of these two questions. The National Endowment for the Arts has been certainly a huge contributor and longtime supporter. As a Rose Fellow, I got one of my first grants from the National Endowment for the Arts. And I think many people here have also gotten grants from National Endowment for the Arts. But over the last number of years, under Jason's leadership, I've seen that entity become like a catalytic spark for creativity and innovation. Somebody asked me earlier today, oh, Jason's here, like, do you think he'll talk to me? I'm like, yeah, like, say hello. So in fact, I feel like really what he's been doing is sort of trolling for talent, trolling for opportunity, trying to find ways to sort of fuel people into this field. And he and his former and current staff. So as this emphasis at the National Endowment for the Arts has helped also blossom into Art Place, which has supported a lot of Joseph's work and other work, we invited Jason here to help us moderate this discussion that I hope will have an edge around both kind of themes about how do we accelerate career paths in design for all of you and many, many, many more, and then how do we also understand how to contribute that design work best to the community. I'm also going to invite up to the stage at the same time three of our host representatives. There are many, many, many people behind these three, of course, but Angela Curry and Greta Armijo and Cindy Weeks, please also come join us. Thank you, and thank you, Jason.
Well, hi, everybody. Oh my God, that was weak. I know you're all hungry. Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm here from the federal government, and I'm here to help. This is like Family Feud, isn't it? Like, we've got the hosts and the fellows. Anyways, exactly. 8:50, you're the top of the list. I was gonna do a little speech, but I think we're speeched out about kind of what the NEA is doing. There is one thing I just want to talk about because it's quite timely. You can come up and ask about all the other stuff we do. Oh, just by the way, who here is an NEA grantee? Let's say show of hands. Okay, yay! Hi, all my peeps. If I've never met you, please come talk to me. There has been a huge focus in the Obama administration on place. Now, part of that came from necessity, because what was the big problem when Obama came in the first time? The recession. The biggest problem with the recession was housing. Everyone was upside down. So if you listen to Alston Goolsbee, he used to be the head of Council of the Economic Advisors, he said, in traditional recessions, people could move to where the jobs were, but if you couldn't sell your house because your house was upside down and underwater, you couldn't move. So that shifted all agencies to focus on place. And I could go on for acres about that, but we want to get to this conversation. So we have been trying to lead the edge about what is the role of design and the role of arts in that conversation. So where does it sit right now? Well, if you follow DC politics, Sean Donovan was moved from housing to the Office of Management and Budget, right? That was a very strategic move by the president to try to really inculcate into the budgets of the agencies the place-based work and to try to shift the way through the budget office how agencies do their work. So there's all these new place-based teams at agencies. USDA just hired 20 new place-based people that are lifers, right? They're going to be there. And then there's all these big meetings trying to figure out a way. It's also sort of living in the vice president's office right now. Find ways to permanently inculcate into the agencies this place-based work. And the great news is we're part of the conversation, right? I mean, we're rinky-dink. Our budget is this size of a speck on my finger. This room is HUD. Not even the full federal agency HUD, federal budget HUD. It's very fast moving. It's very dynamic. It's hard to say exactly where it's going to land, but we're trying. The next president could come in and just be like, whatever, but they are trying to inculcate in the way that they can. So that's all really great news. So what we're really trying to figure out, and I'm so glad you guys began to answer some of these questions, because these are the same questions we have and that we've been talking about, is what does it really mean for design to be at the table, at the community development table? The hardcore, hard community development stuff, right? Like, I sit in a little cubicle 8x8. You guys are like my heroes on the ground doing stuff. But what does it really mean for design to truly be at that table, which will lead to my first question. And I want to get into this, right? I mean, there are two big issues in our society today that anybody with money is paying attention to. People who are applying for grants, listen, perk up at this moment. Resilience and equity. Everybody's going that way, right? Huge issues in our society. How do we make our communities more resilient to the changes that are coming in all different kinds of ways? And how do we deal with the astronomically huge, historic challenges we have around equity in this country, which are sort of exploding all over the place? So, hosts, you get to go first, family. So here come these designers, these young designers. What did you think? What did you think they were going to do for you? And here comes an architecture student, and I'd love to hear about kind of like what your first impressions were about what the expectations were and how they might have changed. So I'm going to start in Mississippi. So why don't you lead us off?
Very good question. Hear me? Very good question, because this it was totally new to us as an economic development organization. And I'm thinking, what are we going to do with an architect? I immediately thought about, drawings and
I
buildings.
think the mic's working, sorry. Can we try this? Oh, yep, that one's working. Here we go. She basically just said she didn't know what to do with an architect. That's what you missed.
But really, it was a little bit frightening to begin. I'm like, okay, we have an architect. Why would an economic development organization need an architect? And I started to think about, the project that was at hand. We had a community that needed help desperately, and I thought about the definition of what economic development really is. It's not just about recruiting businesses. It's not just about job retention and business development, but it's about improving the quality of life of our residents. And of course, affordable housing, decent housing certainly plays a role in that. So Emily came to us and we were like, she's just what we need to get this project going. We had the plans to do the project, but needed someone who could garner community support. Baptist-Town had different entities, organizations in and out of that community promising to bring new, something different, good housing, and none of it ever panned out. And I'm like, Lord, Emily's going to have a terrible time, just getting these people to trust her. And she was able to do it in no time. And, that's the most important part of being able to get a project done, is garnering community support and engaging the community. And she did just that. And now I know that being an architect is not just about drawings and buildings, but it's about, in this case, it's about the social aspect and being able to really help residents improve their quality of life through affordable and decent housing.
Right, let's go to New Mexico. So let's follow up on this a little bit. What were your kind of expectations of what a designer would bring to you? And what did the designer do that was different, that you guys didn't have on hand already?
What we did was we had already 100 houses that we were currently managing. These houses were never built to be sustainable in the long run. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to build housing that will last longer or more durable than 15 years. So we already had in mind that we were going to build 15 to 18 units on a 7.9 acre lot. knowing that we have a big deficit in housing needs, we had to come up with creativity, but never did we think that we had to bring in community engagement. That has never been done. It was tribal council decisions that kind of took the project going forward. So what Joseph brought to us was bringing the community together, asking them, what is it that you need in your area? How can we design for that? And so our 15 to 18 unit project has now become a 41 unit affordable, culturally related housing project. We brought community members and asked them about their history, what it means, the values of it, and put it into the current design that we have. And so now we are very excited about our housing project. It's not just another subdivision. It's a subdivision that has a whole lot more meaning, that can bring families together, also bringing services to these low-income families.
Awesome. Cindy, what else besides the community engagement piece did Geoffrey bring to you guys?
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm just been very honored to have Geoffrey work with our team.
He's staying. You don't have to
I know.
He's decided to stay.
Oh,
I'll leave the room if you want the truth.
Exactly.
well, I was buttering him up because I'm going to tell a funny story now. But and the other two members of our team are young gentlemen as well. And one of the biggest criteria we had for our Rose Fellow is a sense of humor. And Geoffrey certainly brought that to our team. But we had, when he started out, we knew we had a lot of energy to harness with him. And we had two separate offices, and two of us were in one. At first, Geoffrey was in one by himself, and then the other two were in the other one. And I walked into work one day, and they were basically taking sledgehammers to the wall between the two offices and because they wanted us to work in a more team-like fashion. And I think I said something like, have you consulted the plans to see if, this is a structural wall or whether we should be taking this down? And they pulled out the plans and figured that out. But up until the time that Geoffrey came to work with us, we were much more pragmatic about our design. You all have heard about North Carolina and what's happening there politically, and our state is very conservative about spending money on affordable housing. I even had one of the state Housing Finance Agency folks say to me, we don't like LEED. And I said, why? And he said, well, because our elected officials are saying, why do those poor people get to live in LEED homes and we don't? So that's kind of the perspective we're coming from. And what Geoffrey brought to us, and what we anticipated he would bring to us, but what he brought in spades was figuring out how to create beautiful design within the budget of the financing agencies that we have working with us. And I think the number one concern I have for the future for Katie's challenge, then what is it, 19 million? Is that there's a big disconnect between local government officials that are planning the budgets and what is needed to build affordable housing, and they're not understanding what we need to do this job and how the resiliency of the job that we're all doing.
Great, thanks. I have one more question that I want each of you to address, and then you guys get ready because we need to have a conversation. So I'm dying to know this. Here you guys come, well-intentioned, probably not from a similar background to many of the communities you're being placed into. How did you navigate and build trust? I mean, the lucky few that will get this not award, but tough job for the next couple of years. Congratulations. What was that like? I mean, you come from a different economic background, potentially. I don't know your guys' backgrounds. You come from I know many of you came from a different racial background. I know working in tribes, if you've never done it before, is a totally different thing. They are sovereign nations. They are not the same country. And so I just want to hear each of you speak about that, the challenges you had with that, because so clearly you kind of won that and were successful. So, go ahead.
I'm happy to start because I'm right here, but I think Emily wins the award among the three of us, so I'll keep mine brief. There's a lot of different strategies, and I'll just give an anecdote. For the Eagle Marketplace development, communication with the community has been huge throughout the process, like hugely important. There's a lot of eyes on what's going on. So when you have a stalled construction project for a year, a lot of people are wondering what's going on. So one of the businesses that has been there for over 20 years and is still existing on the block is a barber shop called Smooth's Drop In. And I started getting my haircut there. And Smooth knows everything about the community. He knows every rumor that's going on. Public officials get their haircut there, so he hears what's going on at the county commission. And so by me getting my haircut there, I'm sort of participating in an informal community conversation. And after the third time I go, he trusts me. And so I think finding an ally and being a regular presence in the community helps tremendously when you're working with in a community that's foreign to you. I didn't live in Asheville, so I didn't know where to start, but I do know I need to get a haircut every couple months. So.
Geoffrey told me that he went a couple days ago, so. Yeah. As Angela mentioned, when I got to Greenwood, I think survey fatigue definitely doesn't even come close to saying how sick of being talked to people in Baptist-town were. There was this idea that things were being taken all of the time. People were just taking their ideas and their pictures, and so I didn't take any pictures for probably the first year almost. And I had been really studying and indoctrinated in these theories about community engagement. It's always about putting the community first and asking, but I couldn't ask anything. So the pocket park that you see in some of those pictures, right or wrong, we just did it. We had to get in the door. So we finalized the design, we got the city to give us the land, we got this really grumpy old man to give us some lumber for some of the benches we built. John and the Carl Small Town Center came over and we dug and we poured concrete all in a weekend. And what happened is we got to know the kids. There's probably a dozen kids under the age of 12 that are still good friends and chase the car down the block and say, like, you're back, if we haven't been around for a week. So we built that, and then there was the playground you saw some pictures of. That was all 2013, and then we didn't do anything visible. And by May, it was like we'd never done anything. And that was part of why we had the color vote competition for the paint color at the community center. And I remember writing my blog post for Enterprise, and I called it a fresh coat of trust. And so I think that my really long way to say that we haven't done it yet is that we're still building that trust every day. And I've been gone for 2 weeks, so I better get back and get to it on Monday.
I guess at Santo Domingo, so I'm coming from a Plains tribe, so I am a tribal member of one of those 567 tribes, but I'm not a Pueblo Indian. And so here is really trying to understand the community, ask questions, and basically listen, and do a lot of listening. My whole first year was just trying to understand how the community works, understanding when cultural activities happen, and listening to key people in the community. What should we be doing? What should we not be doing? And that whole first year was just trying to learn really what the community is all about, and that took a lot of time, and basically trying to build that trust. What was, I think, really important too is not making any promises, right? A lot of tribal communities and a lot of marginalized communities get promises made, or this is gonna get built, and it doesn't happen. So really just trying to say, well, I can't make any promises, but this is what we're working on, and it might happen. I can't say yes or no, and that's hard. But hopefully, and I'm still keeping my fingers crossed that we can break ground on this 41 unit housing development and break ground on the amazing trail we're working on. But I think until we really start moving some dirt, it's going to be a trust issue that we're going to have to continue with. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Let's move out and start having a conversation now, because we've got about 15 minutes. Certainly there's a lot of you that are hoping to maybe do this someday, so I'd imagine you might have questions for our hosts or for some of these folks. So any questions from the crowd? Again, we'd like to kind of stick with the themes that we're on right now, which are really about how and when does design matter. I'd love to talk about when it doesn't. Design does not do everything. And I wasn't checking my Instagram. I was just trying to remember what these themes were. Snapchat, which I'm not even on. Too old. Matching values with value, attracting and retaining investment and funding. And what does success look like? Everyone's least favorite question, evaluation. So questions from our potential folks. Don't be shy. I'm not. Come on. I know it's been a long day. Yes, ma'am. Right here. Just stand up, say your name.
Hi, I'm Maya Sharkey. This is a question for the outgoing fellows. So I know that the Rose Fellowship has a lot of, I wouldn't say hand-holding, but retreats and training, and also making you feel like a part of a community in addition to the community that you're based in. Do you think without that, I don't want to call it training meals because I think that that's the wrong way to frame it, and I'm sorry to say that first, but without that kind of extra building.
It's all right. Clearly I'm trolling, so.
Could you see yourself doing what you're doing now, and could you give advice for people who maybe don't have the extra touch of the fellowship, want to be doing this kind of work? What would you say for that?
Good question.
Emily, would you repeat the question for the take?
Yes. So Maya touched on the fact that we have had access to incredible resources and to a great network for the last 2.5 years, and that has leveraged us and our capabilities. So we've been able to do so much more than we would have been able to on our own. So I guess that's part of my answer is we have been able to do so much more than we ever would have on our own. I think that the step that Nella and Katie and the team have taken today to bring finalists and applicants into the fold is a really important first step towards expanding that, so that even if you don't get to try your hand at being a fellow, that you've gotten welcomed in. So I think that's important. But I think that you can create your own network too. Every year I get better at networking. I think when I was 22, I still had no idea that it mattered. But luckily, I was not 22 when I got the fellowship, so I had a good idea that it was important, and I really pursued that. And so now I have that as a skill. So not only do I have these people that will always be friends and allies, it's one of my favorite words that Geoffrey uses a lot, I'll have that, but I'll also have that skill and know how to seek that out. So that's my recommendation, is to seek out your own network of people and resources.
I'll just add a little bit to that, which is that I think somebody with the skill sets that we had when we started the fellowship, or even still now, can really become a part of this in amazing ways, partly because word's gotten out. And, CDCs are now calling up Katie and Nella and wanting to participate in the fellowship, and there are way too many host applications than they can potentially put fellows into. So, word's getting out in the community design field that young architects are doers. And so my suggestion would be work, in your community, get in touch with community development organizations and see if there's maybe a small grant that you can partner on, and a project that you could execute to demonstrate that you're capable of working with under-resourced communities, and use that to kind of keep building.
I'm just going to bring our host back into this conversation real quick, and I'm selfish. What did the designers, what were their limits? Like, what could they not bring to the, I'm putting you on the, no. This is a big question we have right now in the national conversations. I'm not kidding, right? Like, this is not a joke. Like, we go and we're like, design does all this amazing stuff. And they're like, really? So, you got to, there's a box around what the limitations of what design can do and what not do. What are the, which is related to, what are the things that these folks all need to know about skill sets that they need to pull from somebody else for, right? Those kind of relationships they need to build. I'm going to start with who looked the least intimidated by that question. Fearful faces.
I think that most of the architects are rather young, and so they don't have a lot of experience dealing with the, I think it was in Katie or someone in their introductory remarks talked about, like on my side, drafting the pro formas and the cash flow projections and raising the money. And the fellows come in more, I guess, optimistic, and everybody's shaking their head, yes. Yeah. Well, they still are, but I guess the beauty of that is that we've learned to be more optimistic. They've learned to be more pragmatic. So that kind of blend of the two things together, I think, moves the conversation forward. At least in our community, it did that.
I'll just add, with our project, we had a plan already established. We just needed someone to carry it forward. So when Emily, came in, I was totally open to listening to her strategies. I always tell her, I said, Emily, I think I've learned much more from you than you have from me. But she managed to get in the community, and she learned people and resources quickly. I mean, she's managed to network and get to know folks and resources. So, I haven't had to hold Emily's hand at all. I mean, she pretty much has the freedom to do what she needs to do to get the projects done. And, she's done that, and she's done a very good job of it. And I think maybe the second week working with us, I asked her, are you gonna stay? So, so she's done a very, very, very good job of getting things done, and there really were no limitations. She knew what was expected, and she did a great job.
I'm gonna get you a superhero cape.
For Santo Domingo, my biggest concern for having a Rose Fellow coming in was time. I had to make sure that I kept reminding Joseph, things go on real slow time here. There's a process. You have to be careful who you talk to. You can't promise anybody anything. My biggest concern was him saying the wrong thing to a tribal leader, not knowing who these tribal leaders were, just trying to be careful and looking out for him the first year. Before we knew it, everybody was all like, whoa, where's that guy? He's the outsider. And so he became popular. He became very popular because things are happening. Things are happening, and people were excited to see things happening. People were excited to be coming to meetings, to understand what's going on. What are the changes that are happening? And the changes started happening. And so lately, the biggest, I guess, obstacle that I was fearful was Joseph going to the governor's office and asking for a land extension. And surprisingly, he was granted land. And that is the biggest success. So,
that's amazing.
It has been an amazing ride. And he was never limited except for being careful of what he stated out in the open, to tribal leaders, because you have to respect that. Coming from being an outsider, you have to respect, where you're working and what the community is really about. And so he has deserved his representation there.
Great. Note to self to all the young people: be popular. For reals, kindness matters, right? People want to be around people who are nice. And that's true for wherever you're going to work in life. Okay, more questions from the crowd. Yes, ma'am, over here. She can run in heels.
Like hip hop style. So I guess my question,
Who are you and where are you from?
I'm Jess. I'm from Seattle. I'm a finalist candidate. What do you call us? I'm a person.
Your designers.
And I guess my question is, so I work at a community design center now, and we talk about lessons learned a lot. And so I guess my question, and I was thinking this was a fellow question, but maybe it's a fellow and a host question of like, what were your biggest stumbling blocks and or lessons learned over the course of the fellowship?
Yeah, I mean, so working at Santo Domingo and trying to understand the kind of landscape and the context, I think it really came down to those parts that you're not trained in school or in an architecture firm about contracts and learning a lot of law and writing and finances, putting together spreadsheets. This idea of what are the real things the developer is doing and trying to make those things happen, but using it with the lens of design and architecture and why should an architect and not an engineer do this and so on, and so, or why should we hire a landscape architect and trying to convince other tribal programs why we're meeting so many times. I think it was really, and it just needed to be done, right? And why am I reading this contract over 5 different times? Why do I have to talk to the lawyer again? Why do I have to, it just became so much, and it's just what you need to do to get a project completed and done, so.
By working in government. Next.
I think that as hard as getting a project step by step moving forward is, I think the thing that I continue to learn is how challenging capacity building is. And I need to do a better job moving forward of benchmarking and trying to set some specific capacity building goals instead of talking about it in theory. I would be lying if I said that the community center was functioning well as it is. We're open a few hours a week and we're figuring it out, but the few neighborhood residents who are really committed volunteers are still trying to figure out what that means and what those roles can be. I think that even when we try to talk about failures, sometimes things come across as rosier and more perfect than they are. So we're optimistic, but we try to be realistic. I think my other big lesson learned is something I've been rolling around and struggling with for the last few years of my career, and that is it's going to be a challenge to, as much as I want to stay in Mississippi for at least a few years, it's a big question to figure out if it's the place I want to live for the rest of my life. Greenwood has about 15,000 people. It's pretty different from here. And but I think that my challenge to young social designers is to stay put. I think that's radical, but really important. I don't know that we can do the work otherwise, but I'm still trying to figure that out.
You guys want to jump in? You? Do you want to, anyone?
I mean, I have failure I can share other than the slab, but
That's very clear.
just really quickly, yeah. A project that I didn't talk about was one of our collaborative actions of $5,000 Love and Forgiveness grant. And while in many ways it was a success, the one in Asheville that I did identified a community group that was working in a public housing community to try and bring access to fresh, healthy foods where there wasn't a grocery store nearby. They had a business plan for a mobile market that another nonprofit had helped. They had business training, and I got to know them, and they were really inspiring individuals. And I said, well, what do you need? And they said, we need a van. And I was like, I can fix that. I'll get you a van. So I got them a van, got some money for some inventory, helped them along with startup, and pretty quickly realized that their needs were so much greater than what was apparent on the surface. There's some incredible barriers to success in running a small business, particularly if you're coming out of public housing. And I think I was naive in that instance, and still remain good friends with the people who ran it, but very far from a successful business that we launched out of that.
Okay. Question right here.
George, I'm an artist. if there is 100 people in this room and most of them are architects, 2 of them are not, Mary, Miss, and myself. Joseph invited Mary and I to be part of mentoring the artists at Santo Domingo, Pueblo. And what I would like to add to this discussion is that the communicative power of the artists are such an amazing one. And I think that Joseph really saw a lot of that in action, and I think that would be nice to have him talk about that.
Does our host from Santo Domingo want to talk about that at all? Or we'll go to Jeff. So the question was basic. He just wanted him to talk about what the role was involving the selfishly, I want you to talk about that all night, but
Yeah.
5 minutes.
No, I'll try and sum it up. No, I mean, the work going on at Santo Domingo, I think, is really centers around the kind of culture and the arts of the community, right? 75% of the community really depends on the artist's economy to provide the kind of very basic needs, providing food on the table, and their basic means of doing that is working on their art, and it's not in the sense that, oh, I'm going to go sell a painting and become rich. It's I need to provide a basic need, and I think what is so important at Santo Domingo, how do we provide the infrastructure? How do we provide those networks that within the built environment to make that easier for the artists, right? The idea of providing an incubator or leveraging the trading post as a place for economic development or for the artists, or the idea of making, instead of families working on their art just in their homes, let's put it in the landscape and allow for the whole community to understand that this is something very special and we should cherish it and we should really understand it and use it more to the community's benefit. I mean, Indian country, I think, has an opportunity for that, and I think that's something that is huge in a lot of rural communities. Every community has a group of artists, and they're very special, and communities kind of can leverage that to kind of help the economy thrive. And I think that's what's really important at Santo Domingo is giving them the ability to giving them the tools and letting them run with it. I think that could things could happen ideally, right? Hopefully.
Well done, you passed the test. We have time for one last question. Yes, over here.
My name is Alan, and I'm from about 15 minutes that way. I want to say that the idea that you guys are staying on at your organizations for the next year, that just speaks really highly about your commitment and your investment. And it taps into my question about, now that you sort of see your time wrapping up maybe, I wonder what you think about what's next, how you see your futures unfolding, and how this has really helped you focus and think about that.
The question was, what does the future hold for the three of you? So take out your crystal ball and don't disappoint your bosses. No pressure.
We've actually been having that conversation at my office for, I don't know, about the last year or so. And it's a difficult one, because I think the question for me is whether I am an architect or am I a community developer, or am I both? And so, you know, as a Rose Fellow, you kind of have a protected role in the organization. You have a certain amount of freedom, and I think we haven't yet put all our heads together and written the job description for me of what is my role. I'm sure I'll continue to be an architect. I also do some work for our single-family homeownership department that I enjoy. But I think that there's an expectation on my organization's part and a desire on my end to kind of take a leadership role within the organization and take my background and training and become a developer. So that's, I think, what the future holds for me.
I like how you talked about the protected role. So one thing that is could definitely be considered a failure is that I talked about an 11-unit cottage project that we did. We have 26 cottages, so there are 15 waiting. So the question of value paired with values is a big one for me, because even to get to the 26 that we had hoped to do during these 3 years, I need another $500,000 at least. So that's a known that will hopefully happen in the next 18 months. We always put these deadlines out there, and then we find the piece of paper later, that says, well, by then we'll be done. So I think there are a lot of knowns. It's a really natural thing to continue working in Baptist-town right now, and to continue working with the Carl Small Town Center at Mississippi State. But what I think the fellowship has also given, as being sort of this protected space, is some of this wonderful gift that is some brain space. So since during the fellowship, I always say it's sort of a 2-for-1 deal that Enterprise got. So my husband and I work very closely on all of these projects. So we've started a nonprofit and a for-profit design, build, and social impact company. So we're starting some smaller projects, and I'll be staying on with the Economic Development Foundation, but it's not going to be 100% of the time. And so we have these really wonderful tenets that we've laid forth for our fledgling business that we get to dig into now and sort of test in application.
Yeah, I mean, in any one of these communities, there is more than a lifetime's worth of work, right? You could spend your entire life in any one of these communities and the work will still be there. And I think that goes without saying, is you want to try and make an impact. And I think at Santo Domingo, I want to try and get to that point where we're building enough capacity that at some point they won't need myself, right? Or they won't need a person in that capacity, that the community themselves are kind of taking that on and they're doing it internally. Ideally, work myself out of a job and maybe go to another tribal community and build capacity there. But I think in the immediate future, it's continuing building that capacity at Santo Domingo and continue getting these projects going and trying to figure out, well, what does that mean at the national scale? What does it mean at the local scale? I think that combination of understanding that national dialogue along with the kind of the boots on the ground is hugely important to kind of have your hand on both levers there. So.
Okay, we're a little bit out of time. Let's have an amazing round of applause for these awesome people. Okay, before I pass it back to Katie, I have to do my little pep talk. So this stuff is not easy. You did not get into this to make $1 gajillion. You did not get into this because it's going to be easy. It's going to be really hard. And there's going to be moments when you're out there in the field by yourself that you feel very isolated, that you're the only person fighting for what you believe is the right fight. You're fighting against unbelievable forces, 279 years of racial oppression in the country. These are not things that are going to be gotten over really easily. But every little bit helps. Do not lose the passion. There are people like Katie, like myself, Jamie Hand at Art Place back there, who are on the national level passionately fighting to support you guys on the ground. We are here to help you in every way that we can, which is somewhat limited. It's the depressing part of the pep talk. But just keep doing it. Do not lose faith. You have other people there's an amazing network of people who can help you along the way. So with that, take my card when I get off the stage here. Let's thank these guys again, and Katie's going to come back up. Thanks so much.
Okay, well, I'm just going to really say thank you to our fellows and our hosts who hardly knew what they were getting into. And then mostly to our new fellows and hosts and all of you who have really joined our network today, welcome to our world. We are so glad to have you, and we look forward to a lifelong of work together. Thank you.